cartography book. We're going to skip the scale theory stuff, so go read that if you'd like, and focus on the case studies, which you can see in the pictures here. Dissertot describes two modes of spatial narration, the map and the tour. With the former, one is seeing and ordering places from above. With the latter, one is narrating the embodied practice of going and doing from below. Where seeing from above is associated with maps as representations, the embodied going and doing is about practice and touring. Cinema and cartography come from similar backgrounds, but are vastly different techniques for constructing representations of the world. Central to this distinction is what John Pickles has called the cartographic paradox, the fact that linear perspective and map projections mutually informed one another's development during the European Renaissance. These scopic regimes offered new ways to visualize space, place, and landscape. These scopic regimes offer a means through which to create pictures of the world, seen, and translate them into representational scenes. While both scopic regimes trace the world seen into coherent images, projectionism removes the subject by using math instead of the body as the referent. Pickles links this practice to Heidegger's argument of the world as picture, where the modern world is dominated by an objective, mathematical, and scientific ontology. Perspectivalism also contributes to the conquest and colonization of the world picture. However, its view is subjective and focuses on the world seen from a fixed point of view. Perspectivalism relies on the definition of a picture as a window, and consequently the frame is essential to this scopic regime. The frame positions the viewer, and therefore the image is reliant on the vanishing point, the horizon line, and the orthogonals. In contrast, projectionism is not reliant on the window to frame its image. Where linear perspective maintained an active viewing subject engaged in the gaze, projectionism sought to denounce the ownership of the viewing subject and thereby objectify the gaze. Although the cartographic gaze seeks to denounce its gazer, it cannot denounce the fact that maps are embedded with subjective power relations and meaning. With the cartographer's gaze, there is an attempt to rationalize the vertical view of a space in the name of science, allowing for an objective, abstract, geometric document of reason. As Alpers notes, before the intervention of mathematics, the closest approximation to a map projection had been the panoramic views of artists, Pantinier's so-called world paintings and landscapes, which also lack a positioned viewer. In contrast, the view represented through linear perspective reflects the tradition of topography. The topographer's gaze is viewed from within the landscape, or more generally, it is the horizontal gaze versus cartography's vertical one. The topographer's gaze is never static, but always searching and moving through the landscape, a haptical mobile visuality. Cinema is the modern form of the topographer's gaze. The similarities and differences between cinema and cartography are best understood by positioning them within the tripartite scalar hierarchy of Ptolemy. That is, of geography, chorology, and topography. Where geography, we are focused on universal laws, space, objectivity, and science. With chorology, we're focused on regional description, where in today's world, the quantitative and qualitative geographic traditions meet. With topography, we focus on localities, places, subjectivity, and the humanities. As Del Doro notes, this distinction and its Renaissance interpretation came to characterize much of the history of modern geography. Topography requires a viewing subject from whose vantage point representations of a localized place or scene are created. That is, the topographer, the eye must be imagined gazing upon the world from which it is a part. Perspectivalism offers a means for the topographer to gaze upon the world and record it into a representation. Landscape and cinema are part of the topographer's tradition, a scenographic space that is cued for construction. With landscape, we can trace it to either its Germanic tradition as an aerial unit of shared agrarian customs, or the more modern one of a physical scenery and its visual composition. Cinema comes from the latter lineage, reflecting the perspectival imposition of space onto representation, with the camera as the point of a sure and centrally embracing view. Cinema derives from the perspectival system, but has changed it through movement, montage, focal length, shot angle, which shift the central fixed point of the eye or lens. Cinema is the modern form of the topographer's gaze. It positions a person in touch with the local landscape, allowing one to apprehend the physical and social environment. We cannot separate the topographer from the land, nor their description from the meaning of a place. The topographer apprehends the landscape that they wander through, just like the flaneur in the city. But in our first case study, we challenge this notion of the flaneur just being of the city by engaging with the Western film Ombre with Paul Newman. In Westerns, the flaneur is a connoisseur of the landscape, the terrain, vegetation, cultural features, and the threats that make one apprehend their surroundings viscerally. Our first case study. Filmed in 1966, Ombre was the first of 3 films by Paul Newman done at Old Tucson Studios. Directed by Martin Ritt and featuring an outstanding performance by Richard Boone, Ombre was adapted from the Western novel by Elmore Leonard, who had 3 movies done at Old Tucson. Ombre is considered one of the early revisionist Westerns with an estranged and indifferent hero. The mid-60s and 70s saw a demythification of the Western genre, its basic tenets, and its conventions. Ombre is an example of the demystification of the Western genre's hero. These revisionist Westerns were also a part of what Slocum has called the new cult of the Indian. Ombre is a variant of this new cult where the white male gaze can go native and play Indian through appropriating Indianness. A little bit of background. Tucson lies in the American Southwest and is about 112 kilometers from the Mexican border. It is a part of the Sonoran Desert, which is considered one of the most biodiverse regions of the world. Gradients of elevation and moisture create an array of vegetation communities and landscapes, including the thorny scrub vegetation with the stately saguaro pictured in the lower right, desert grasslands, oak pinyon forests, and even tundra at its highest elevation. Topography is most often conceived of today as map or pictorial representations of terrain and their biomes. Topography requires the person in touch with a place to observe, write, and draw descriptions about the place, and in general apprehend the shape of the physical and cultural landscape. It is no wonder then that the modern definition of a landscape follows that of topographical inquiry as one relating to scenery and its visual composition. Topography unfolds through events like the expedition of John Wesley Powell through the Southwest. An event, in this case, is what creates a sense of space and place because it calls for a heightened consciousness of prehension that is of contact with the ambient world. Cinema is a topographical representation, an assemblage of image events composed shot by shot. In cinema, events take space and transform them into narrative places. Westerns are a topographical event involving the apprehension of landscape. Westerns are stories that guide us through the landscape, a haptical mobilization. We cannot separate the topographer from the land, nor their description from the meaning of place. Bazine argues that what provides the building block for the architectural ensemble of a film is not the shot, but rather the image fact. Each image fact has its own density, its own independence, and its ability to act, regardless of how it's deployed within a shot. Image facts are not inherently made for a single interpretation, and therefore when they're deployed, they can have unintended consequences. Facts have a pre-ontological status before they're deployed in narrative cinema. They have their own resonant qualities, if you will. Cinema stitches together disparate topographic image facts into a composite whole to create a seamless geographical imaginary for a specific narrative. The topographic image facts in and of themselves may only make sense within a given shot or image event. However, when edited together to create a whole, it creates the geography of a film. Analyzing these topographies of cinema require us to look at these image events as well as their image facts. Ombre, like many Western films were made at Old Tucson Studios, draws from the geographical imaginary of the latter half of the 1800s, the height of colonialism in southern Arizona. Elmer Leonard's novel was based on the Chiricahua Apaches, whom John Russell, alias Ombre, grew up with around the San Carlos Indian Reservation, which was established December 14, 1872. This was during the period of the Camp Grant massacre, where over 100 Apache men, women, and children were killed, as well as the capture of their chief of the Chiricahuas, Geronimo. Southern Arizona was the epicenter for much of the mythology of the Western genre, including the gunfight at the OK Corral and the rise to fame of Billy the Kid, who killed a local blacksmith and later escaped from the Fort Grant stockades. You can see Fort Grant on this map. In the book, Ombre is a lone topographer who guides the narrative through a series of events, saves a group of stagecoach passengers from death in the harsh Sonoran Desert. Stagecoaches are central to the geographic imaginaries of Westerns, with smaller, locally owned operators carrying their own short-lived routes connecting army forts, small towns, and mining camps, like the one shown here. In Leonard's novel, the fictional Hatch and Hodge stagecoach runs from the San Carlos Indian Reservation, alias Sweet Mary as well, down to Bisbee. Based on the navigational evidence and route descriptions presented in the novel, we can trace the story from San Carlos south down the San Pedro River to Benson, Contention, and Bisbee. The story follows Ombre as he catches a ride on the Hatch and Hodge stagecoach, heading to Contention, where he is to see a hotel that he has inherited from his estranged father. Fearing a robbery, which occurred anyway, the group detoured east through the Guerrero Wilderness and along the Pinalino Mountains. Following the stagecoach robbery, Russell and the passengers meander through the Aravapa Canyon, northwest of Fort Grant, before returning to the St. Pete mine for its finale. The movie changes the narrative slightly, but keeps much of the same narrative geography, if you will. Old Tucson, in this case, plays Sweet Mary. Delgado Station and much of the sandy desert scene shown after the stagecoach robbery were actually shot outside of Las Vegas at a popular dry lake bed in Jean, Nevada. The San Pete mine was constructed just for this film and lies 1,600 meters up in the Santa Rita Mountains, just below Gunsight Pass. A film historian remarked that the San Pete mine looked as if it was literally clinging to a cliff. The San Pete mine, shown in blue, was built on land formerly a part of the Helvetia Rosemont mining district, and this is still an active mining district. You can see the open pit mine in the lower left. Gunsight Pass, shown in orange, was the site of the stagecoach robbery. These sets were only accessible through the ghost town of Helvetia, which was owned by the Anaconda Mining Company. Though Old Tucson frequently used the Santa Rita Mountains, director Martin Ritt's choice to shoot in such a remote location was never repeated. Ombre begins with a series of still photos of Native Americans while the credits roll and somber music plays in the background. These image facts validate the appropriation of race, ethnicity, and identity onto the opening image. A close-up of Paul Newman with long brown hair, tanned and dirty face, deep blue eyes, and wearing a headband. Neil Diamond, the director of the documentary Real Engine, notes that headbands were very useful props to hold wigs on white actors. Only in the opening scene of the film are we shown Native Americans who never speak, but are shown in association with John Russell. This thin appropriation of racial identity onto our lead white male actor is supposed to frame our disbelief and makes the association of him as a Chiricahua. The topographies of race have a long history in colonialism and geographic representation. In many atlases, racial profiling is a means to represent and characterize the people in regional topographies that literally frame the larger colonial cartographic enterprise. Topographical surveys like John Wesley Powell's are the events through which these racial topographies are created. These cartographic expeditions are often conducted by the military, and people are characterized in the same way as plants, animals, and other resources are. As in many Westerns, the main character acts as an expert regional topographer. It is made apparent to the viewer that Russell's skill comes from being raised as a Chiricahua. This background gives him both the ability to harness the power of the landscape, while his whiteness gives him the ability to command others. After the stagecoach robbery, Russell and the others are left to fend for themselves in the wilderness. Russell acts fast by scampering up the side of a steep slope while the others race to catch up. Once safe, Russell's first act is to remove his boots and put on his moccasins. This iconographic act reinforces Russell as a regional Sonoran topographer who is in touch with the landscape and apprehends his surroundings. Russell's indifference to the needs of his companions and the harsh desert surrounding play upon the stoic Indian stereotype. As a topographer, his movements are based on reading natural signs, traveling at night to avoid the heat of the day, and thinking only through reading the landscape rather than thinking about those dependent on him for his survival. Russell's Native American status within the film appears to have allowed him to elide racial differences. However, his indifference to white hegemony is what kills him in the end. Russell is killed protecting a civilization he is indifferent to, and also literally killed by the topography of the situation, because he cannot defend against relying on other white people to read the signs of the landscape to save him. Apprehending the landscape is central only to the topographer in this Western, and not a quality shared by his white companions, who he has entrusted with his life. Second case study. Chorology, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is the art or practice of describing or delineating on a map or chart particular regions or districts as distinguished from geography, dealing with the earth, and from topography, which deals with particular places. With the quantitative and digital revolutions, the importance of the concept of region has been redeployed for practical oversight analysis in geographic information systems. Regional GIS is the digital spatial data infrastructure of all nations in the world. And like other economic activities and economic development practices, film production is now increasingly done at the regional level throughout the world. Data from the San Diego project covers about 20 years of data, 67 features, 61 movies, and 32 television series, accounting for about 439 episodes. In this way, GIS acts as an archaeological tool, if you will, to explore the ongoing formation of a cinematic landscape over a period of time. In San Diego, the spatial extent of television shows has the largest domain, followed by features and television movies. The circle on the map is a standard deviation ellipse and highlights the greatest area of activity. Television shows have a distinct east to west trend, whereas features are oriented much more north-south. This is based on production practices where television shows take advantage of the more rustic and rural locations in the East County, while features are drawn to the north by the mansions of Rancho Santa Fe. A kernel density analysis reveals the highest concentration of all filmmaking by production type occurs in the downtown corridor, nearby beaches, and around the Stu Segal production facilities in Kearny Mesa. The mean center of each production type is within proximity of each other and proximate to Stusigal's facilities, the largest facility in the county. The average distance between the mean centers are only about 1.8 kilometers. Stusigal's locational usage accounts for 75% of all filming in this database, including 98% of all television shows, 41% of television movies, but only 5% of feature films. Most feature films come down out of LA, film for a short period of time, and return to LA so that they don't have to pay per diem. Mean center analysis shows that film production is not tied to the county's population center, but is rather proximate to the hub of regional film production in Kearny Mesa. San Diego County is about 11,000 square kilometers, but filming only occurs in about 75% of the county. The most densely filmed area is within this red standard deviational ellipse, which includes the most popular beaches, downtown, and the older neighborhoods. 80% of filming occurs within this ellipse, and it represents about 861 square kilometers. Television shows dominate activity in San Diego, representing about 70% of filming. However, if we look at the usage of space by each production, television movies and features use more sites per production than episodic television shows. The difference can be attributed to the length of the production as well as the underlying budgets of the production. There's a unique cinematic land use found in all film production centers. A cinematic land use signature consists of the available buildings, districts, and topography afforded by the region, the types of production that come there, and the networks of interpersonal relations between production workers, permitting agents, and property owners. Whereas regional tourist spectacles have low frequencies of filming but high production value, there are other locations that are highly used that I am going to call regional backlots, where they're returned to over and over again by film and television producers. When we look at the spatial distribution of production data over time, we can begin to see what types of architectural and landscape imaginaries are being extracted from these regional backlots, which in turn tells us what cinematic geographies are afforded in a production region. Unlike studio backlots, which remain fixed and relatively constant through space and time, regional backlots are never static nor fixed. Land use analysis seeks to understand, monitor, and manage patterns of human activity within a specific region. Cinematic land use analysis is no different. It allows for a better understanding of how film production operates within this region. And when we look at film permit records, this allows us to have a spatial and tabular accuracy in the database that we can draw from to cross-collate with other GIS layers like zoning, neighborhoods, transportation, commercial districts. And we can begin to see the footprint, if you will, of the cinematization unfolding across the city on a map. For instance, in San Diego, the central city and waterfront locations were dominated by feature and television movies. These backlots and standing sets are heavily relied on for the ongoing production of a CBD, a cinematic city, if you will. But there's a tendency to use places in combination, and you can see this with the hotspot analysis, especially for the Bayview Medical Center. They don't just go and film to get the closed down hospital look, but they can do some street work, get the Del Coronado Bridge in the background, and then also show meetings at the Grant Hill Park, which is right nearby. Another unique signature of land use analysis is the backlot Anywhere USA, which reflects a sub-niche in the television market and is needed to ground that residential East Coast American look required for many productions. In San Diego, television productions again dominate about 95% of this backlot. And Kathy McCurdy, the former San Diego Film Commissioner, commented, Anywhere USA? Oh, yes, that's the old money look. That's the Leave It to Beaver. Not so much terracotta or stucco tiled roofs, and definitely no palm trees. This backlot lies in the single-family residential neighborhoods of La Playa and Mission Hills, both older and established neighborhoods with majestic trees and dense vegetation. Most major film productions centers have an Anywhere USA backlot that is well known to location scouts. It'll be interesting to see how LA recovers. Its Anywhere USA was Altadena, which was burned down. Cinematic land use analysis provides a basis for film GIS databases to be created and can be used along with other regional economic development tools in 4 ways. First, a tool to help planning and implementing logistics related to location production or film production. Second, integration into other regional GIS databases for better management, maintenance, and economic development oversight by government agencies. 3, it allows for a means to produce spatially accurate reports about film production. And finally, serving as a digital humanities archive for researchers and film buffs alike in a region. Let's move to the geographic case study. 500 Days of Summer is a cult classic romantic comedy that was initially set in San Francisco. However, that changed when Joseph Gordon-Levitt and director Mark Webb took an LA Conservancy walking tour, and the script was rewritten for downtown LA. The impact of the tour is writ large on the film. Historic architecture dominates. In this case study, I drew from Film LA Data, a nonprofit agency that issues film permits. And it consisted of 54 film permits for this film. Following the process of geocoding or placing locations on the map comes ground truthing. Ground truthing is where the cartographer checks to see if a location on the map is found on the ground and is actually what it says it is. This is accomplished in person through traveling to a location or done remotely through Google Street View or online sleuthing like the Barclay Hotel, which doubled as a coffee shop in the film. Ground truthing is a cartographically motivated inferential walk through the traces of this virtual city. Indexing, by contrast, is the cartographic process of cinematic ground truthing. Indexing is fundamentally about building a topological relationship between the location's form and reference coordinates in cinematic and map space. Indexing is easy to recognize in places where you have locational stars like the Bradbury Building, but it can be complicated by places doubling for others, like the Point Fermin Lighthouse in LA that plays San Diego in the film. Indexing cinematic locations exposes temporal rifts as well. Tom's favorite place, the park bench at Angel's Knoll, is situated between LA's past and future. Bunker Hill, which is at the top of Angel's Knoll, was once a very fashionable neighborhood with lavish Victorian hotels. During the 1930s through the 60s, it fell into disrepair and became Pulp Fiction's mean streets and film noir's ground zero. Angel's Knoll, long slated for redevelopment, was closed in 2013, just after the film was produced. Handel Architects' $1.2 billion mixed-use project will completely redesign Angel's Knoll while preserving Angel's Flight, which you can barely see on the right, a little funicular that takes you up to the top of Bunker Hill. Tom's favorite spot will soon become just another postmodern menagerie in downtown LA. Cinematic ground truthing with other forms of media show how the social practice of film extends beyond the theater. The park bench up until 2013 became an iconic site on Instagram. Here, engagement with the film's location is a topophilic expression, a means of self-discovery, an emotional remapping of the pathways back to those moments when the film was first watched. Topophilia is a part of the placemaking activities individuals engage with on the cinematic streets of Los Angeles. Indexing involves strolling down the paths used to create the geography of film, as well as how the film and locations resonate with film viewers. A cartographic analysis of the film has two foci. It can situate a film within an era and place, and it can accentuate and sharpen the textual analysis. A majority of the film locations are in downtown, where Tom lives and works. This love story is reflective of a place and era of the millennial generation in the urban core of LA and epitomizes the idea of a millennial city. The analysis of Tom's neighborhood was, this is Tom's neighborhood downtown. An analysis I did using Esri's business analysts to look at his overall trend of this neighborhood. It's generally characterized by metro renters at this time period. Metro renters are characterized by highly mobile, well-educated single people, late 20s and 30s, who spend a large amount of their money on clothing, rent, and technologies. Metro renters also enjoy bars, restaurants, yoga, and shop at Whole Foods, and yes, IKEA. Tom's spatial domain is suitable for pedestrian living as well, with the furthest distance being about a mile from his place of work to the city center. The movie produces a geography of the millennial city, as Tom's downtown area is comprised of the two zip codes that experienced the largest influx of millennials in the 2010s. A cartographic analysis reveals how the masculine gaze of the protagonist, director, viewers become territorialized. Here, the hegemony of the male gaze is socially and spatially reproduced through Tom, who commands the stage and the narrative action. The male protagonist also commands the axis mundi of the film, the park bench, or Tom's favorite place. The park bench approximates the center of the narrative's geography by providing the image fact for the opening and closing scenes of the film. The park bench also approximates the center of locational usage used in the film, thus reaffirming the masculine gaze in the formation of the film's cinematic landscape. Further, the female others, in this case Summer and Rachel, serve as constitutive dependents for the masculine dominant, Tom, and thus are spatially positioned outside of his domain and are only engaged or viewed when he or they can advance his narrative. The density of film locations in downtown show the spatial dominance of Tom's positionality in the narrative. Even in the romantic jaunts, they occur within proximate areas around his domain, except for the lone trip to IKEA in Burbank. Tom's failure to win the girl in his spatial domain is part of the twist of an otherwise standard boy meets girl storyline. However, a happy ending must be met with the approval of the male gaze. Tom meets Autumn in the Bradbury building in the epilogue of the movie. Let's switch and look at the last case study, the geospatial cinema of Old Tucson Studios. So for this work, a group of us got together and did some drone mapping to look at how Old Tucson had changed over time and its development from the 1940s to present. And I focused on three different movies: Arizona, the central inception of the studio itself, which laid out the foundation; Rio Bravo, which is at the height of Westerns and Western film production, and really focuses on the downtown or the main street through the studio; and the film Joe Kidd with Clint Eastwood, which focused on the northern part of the film studio, which is now gone because of a fire. So to do so, I had a bunch of different local geospatial companies come and help do some mapping efforts. Bad Elf, here's Larry Fox, and I and a couple people went and we did some drone mapping at the OK Corral down at Old Tucson Studio. Here's our flight path. Of course, we had to do it on a holiday when no one was around to get clearance. And it gets us about a 2 centimeter level base map, which was needed especially for the film Arizona, which was the foundation of Old Tucson Studio. Big budget production, ended up releasing in black and white, didn't do so great at the box office, but really led to the foundation of Old Tucson. You can see the Golden Gate Peak often in almost every Old Tucson production in the background. It was a huge undertaking. 300 laborers, 180 carpenters, 120 masons, and over 350,000 adobe bricks made just for the set. And the cool thing for you cinematic cartographers like me is Old Tucson is based on a map. It was based on Gus Schneider's 1944 Columbia Pictures map from their art department, which laid out the set and was implemented in the desert landscape. And it is available at the Arizona Historical Society as well. What we did is we took the map, georectified it, put it on to our current drone map, and then started doing 3D building scenes of the original set, and then started a process of ground truthing, which we felt was more like a cartographic archaeology, to see what was still remaining of the sets and what had disappeared. Many of the sets are now kind of eroding back into the desert, if you will. Jump up to Joe Kidd. Joe Kidd was really cool because you can kind of see this northern part where Joe Kidd Courthouse, the soundstage, Kansas Street. Reno is the name of the train. If you remember Joe Kidd, where the train crashes into the bar at the end, that was kind of up there. But all of that was wiped away in 1995 by a fire, and many fires have ruined Western film ranches, if you will, throughout the Western United States. I got Cooper Aerial to give me an image, a historic image, just before the fire. And based on that, again, we created a 3D map off of it. Kansas Street was well known for the opening shots for Little House on the Prairie, which is now gone. And you can see Reno in the background there. And here's the Joe Kidd Courthouse, which is no longer there. So here's the drone map. Here's the 95 aerial, and then we do a new build based on that, and a lot of it is kind of like finding a ghost, if you will, in the landscape, because they no longer are there. The final film that I've been working with is Rio Bravo with John Wayne, Dean Martin, Ricky Martin. Very famous film that was done there, and it was super cool, not just for its height of the production and of John Wayne at Old Tucson, but there was a lot of data at the Oscar Museum related to this production at the time called Bull by the Tail. And especially for cartographers, it had a scaled drawing of the street layout of the main street. And if you look on the right, where it kind of turns and has buildings at the end, there is no end of the main street like that in Tucson. It actually had to be built just for this production. And then going through archives at Old Tucson, I found this oblique air photo, which actually showed the buildings and was able to use that as long as the Herrick's documentation to create a new 3D scene of downtown. And this is kind of what I've been playing with, of going towards, is this idea of putting pictures in their place, or georectifying film images 3D so you can follow a narrative through the landscape, both virtually online, and eventually I want to be able to do augmented tours in person at the site. Dean Martin welcoming the arrival of the cowboys into town and telling him he's got to go visit the sheriff. So they ride up to visit the sheriff, and at the very end you see John Wayne welcoming them into town. So a couple conclusions. Disserto's two modes of spatial narration, the map and the tour, are about how the two scopic regimes have naturalized in advance how we view the world as picture. The cartographic paradox comes from Ptolemy's bifurcation of geography as quantitative and focused on the whole earth, and chorology and topography as qualitative and dealing with the parts. I argue that chorology reflects the regional scale wherein a majority of GIS work is conducted today. Further, landscape intersects at the scale of chorology and topography. Landscape can be tied to an individual's viewshed or scaled outward to reflect a distinct region of land. That is why landscape and cinema are part of the topographer's tradition, a scenographic space that is cued for construction. At ever faster rates, visual technologies development since Ptolemy's time is accelerating, so much so that it already feels trite to even try to hold a distinction between the grounded view from below and that from above, especially in we have aerial and aqua drones penetrating Benjamin's optical unconscious to make the extraordinary ordinary. The future of geocinema awaits us. What will it look like? We have seen some of it here today, but more will continue to tear down our optical unconsciousness, and our inattentiveness will grow as cut rates in film and television continue to occur quicker every year. We're becoming increasingly normalized to geospatial big data and geovisualizations. One could argue that the cartographic paradox was engineered because of the binary logic of Ptolemy's geography, where today's scopic regimes are blended as society is awash in visual media and visual technologies. Rather than thinking of these scopic regimes as paradoxical, it may be better to think of them as mutually constitutive of a holistic approach to visualizing modern geography. Thank you.